My goal of the Letters to the Editor workshop today is to have everyone write a letter to be published. We are going to take action. We're not just going to learn about it. We're going to really try this out and stumble a little and see how our voices work in print and how we can effectively communicate the ideas that we have. So today we're going to start just by talking a little bit about what impact letters, op-eds, about media work can have on the issues that we care about. First of all, could someone define what a letter to the editor is? Yeah.
It's when you read something in the newspaper and you're responding to it, whether it's in a positive or negative way, you're just sort of giving your feedback on whatever you had read previously. Mm-hmm. That's my understanding.
Yeah. So you're responding to something in the newspaper. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Like, what if the newspaper isn't already to talk about climate change? How do you just send a random letter to them with the name of the newspaper or publish it?
Yeah. So letters. You bring up a good point that letters to the editor aren't just responding to something, but it could also be starting a conversation that matters to constituents in that community. How else do people think about letters to the editor or op-eds?
An op-ed is slightly different, right? It's when you get either one person or usually a group of people who are experts on a subject to write something that's maybe slightly longer than the letter to the editor in their expertise. And they're kind of raising an opinion on it usually, but it's usually within something that they've either studied or their work field, something where they have some authority to speak on the subject.
Yeah, some authority to speak on that subject. And I'd love to take just a second to think about what that authority could be. When we write letters to the editor to be published, we think of those as anyone can do that. They specifically reach out to constituents, to people who live in those districts to be able to publish. With op-eds, your authority could be a constituent advocate in this community. You're someone that really cares and knows enough to be able to write 750 solid words on that. We have op-eds that are published all the time from folks who work in our community that want to say, this is the amazing work that I've been doing and I hope you'll join. So op-eds aren't out of your reach. If you have a little bit more time and a little bit more energy to bring those to newspapers, that is a great way to build conversation and to really, as you said, start the conversation. Great. So do we feel like we have a working definition of what letters to the editor and op-eds are?
Can you just repeat one more time the letter to the editor?
Yeah. So a letter to the editor is you said it so well. It's a letter that you submit to a newspaper that is used to either start or build on a conversation. Those who use letters to the editor or who submit them are people who are constituents, they're people that live in the communities that those newspapers are from, and anyone can submit them to be published. Great. Yeah.
So say about the Prepare Act, I wanted to discuss about that. Can I write a letter and just submit it to the editor, even though it's not been a big topic of discussion among the constituents?
Yeah, so getting specific, relating to the issues that matter to your community, those are all things that you can talk about. And the Prepare Act, even if people don't know about it, is probably something that people in your community care about. So we'll get more specific about how to really connect those ideas to be able to get published. Yeah.
Can you repeat your working definition of an op-ed?
Cool, yeah. So an op-ed it's an opinion piece. It's typically about 750 words, and the idea behind it is to really frame an argument as a citizen advocate, as someone who has some type of expertise on the issue, to be able to be represented in that newspaper. Great. So before we talk about how to do this effectively, let's think for a second about what type of impact letters to the editor can have. We're going to focus on letters to the editor as a microcosm for the type of media work that you guys can be doing as a whole. So what type of impact can letters to the editor have?
They can, make people in your community think about an issue in a different way than they previously have.
Yeah, that's great. They can make people think about an issue in a different way than they previously have. Am I doing? Or I see. Yeah. Yeah, Jay.
I know that whenever somebody at my meeting gets something, they announce it, so it's a way that if you didn't know about something before, people are gonna be excited that they got something published, so it's gonna spread the word about something.
Yeah, it's a way to lift up an idea in your community. Yeah. And not just to infuse that idea within your meeting, but outside of your meeting, to reach people that are outside your immediate community and relationships. Yeah.
When you mention someone important by name or specific issue that garners attention from any kind of search engine or things that people are looking to find information, you've tagged yourself as someone who wants to talk about it.
Yeah, great. That's wonderful. You're kind of naming yourself as an expert in some ways, a community leader. What else? How else could they be used specifically to lobby your members of Congress?
And then I assume they read them.
Say a little louder.
I assume their staffers read them and report back.
Yeah. So
Put their name on it.
yeah, put the members of Congress's name on it. The number one suggestion that I will give for all of you when you're publishing letters to the editor, op-eds, you're engaging on a news story and they get a quote from you, put the name of your members of Congress in there. Their staff on a daily basis search their name in all of the local newspapers that they have. And if you want it to get to the chief of staff's desk, to get to the member of Congress's desk, that's the essential part. Sometimes newspapers will take it out, but it's certainly worth the effort. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you mentioned like the really representative, like on a hard, like a hard copy print newspaper, it's just too accessible for them to find online. So I know in Cleveland we have like the Cleveland Plain Dealer, then we have Cleveland.com, and like they're two separate, entities. So like how do you know like if it's in print that they'll actually find it and actually like be able to Google it and kind of see the person's name? It's not like
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a really great point about what do you do when certain letters are only published in physical copy? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but that's the importance of flagging your letters to the offices that you're trying to advocate. Yeah.
I just want to add, I worked in the state senate office and they had someone devoted to reading the print copies of newspapers and finding references. So they'll find them in print.
Great. What other ways can these be useful?
They can start dialogue between people about whatever you're writing about. I think the dialogue is a really, really important aspect of what we're doing.
Yeah. Members of Congress right now are trying to understand what their constituents think about diplomacy. There are a lot of really loud advocates on the Hill that are calling in and saying we don't support diplomacy, yet more than 50% of the US supports diplomacy. So a great way to be able to kind of share that consensus, or at least that desire to support this issue, is by putting it in the newspaper. Yes, great. Yeah, okay. I think that's a pretty great list. This is such a useful tool for me. When I was working as the Middle East policy assistant we were working on a letter to the editor campaign about getting Iran diplomacy in the newspaper. This was so important because people literally did not talk about it. People were, when they did talk about it in newspapers, they were really against it. People were scared about getting this voice out. And I think, as someone said here, as you said, this was not an issue that people talked about in these communities in general. It just, when you heard Iran, it was scary and that was it. There was nothing else. There was kind of no nuance to the conversation. And so for us, publishing letters to the editor across the United States meant changing the conversation about this issue. Yeah.
What makes the newspaper choose which letters to publish? Is it-
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. So the list that I have is getting the direct attention of your member of Congress, informing his or her constituents about their position, and building public will and constituent accountability.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. Direct attention from your member of Congress. These are all things that you all have said. I just want to lift that up, that this came kind of intuitively to you. This is just the list that I work with in terms of how we promote this. Inform his or her constituents about their position and build public will and constituent accountability. For the work that you all are doing, some and many conservative districts, when it comes to climate change, it's so incredibly important that you build up the moral call for climate. And this is a place where you can really start to change the conversation about that. Great. Let's talk a little bit about the components of what makes a good letter. I shared with all of you an advocacy for Get Published sheet. Many of you have seen a version of this. And we're just going to go over some of these ideas and then add to this list as much as we can. I was thinking we would just read it around the room. Would you guys ready?
Keep it short. Newspapers are most likely to publish letters to the editor that are short and make one succinct point that is supported with facts or quotes from validators. Check the newspaper you're submitting to for a word limit, or if you can't find the limit, keep it to 150 words or less.
Do people ever have trouble, those who have tried to publish, keeping it to that short? Why is that difficult?
I have a lot to say.
Yeah.
And you want to like give appropriate context for what you're saying.
Yeah. I think as a group, we tend to really try and add the academic facts, the details that support our arguments. So it can be frustrating when we have to keep out all those details. Remember, you're working in the media, so sometimes things are about punchy lines. Yeah.
In the past, when I've tried to work with my regional newspaper, they have a bigger word limit. It's 350, which seems pretty long. Does it still behoove us to, meet whatever limit they establish, or should we try to shoot under that if it seems long? Or?
That's a great point. So some of your newspapers will have larger word limits, especially newspapers that are local. They often are looking to add more content, and so in those cases, feel free to take up that space. That being said, the shorter, I think, the better, because it means that people are just going to get through the point quicker. People are more likely to read it in full. Great.
Connect it. Open with a reference to a recent news story, editorial, or previous letter. Recent means no older than a few days. For national papers, no further back than 48 hours. Your letter will be of more interest to newspaper editors if you highlight the local impact of a national or foreign policy issue.
Great. So what are some of the ways that we can connect our letters? Let's just do a quick verbal brainstorm. Yeah.
Use our own experience. Tell our story.
Tell your story. Yeah, tell your story as a constituent. I'm someone who's lived in Georgia, right? For 24 years, 23 years? 12 years. Yeah.
The direct story that you related to, when you mentioned spring holiday weekend, doesn't have to exactly be on climate change if that's your topic. It could just be another moral issue that you can then segue into what you really want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. That brings up a great point. Oftentimes when I'm publishing letters to the editor, I will find an article that relates loosely to the thing I care about, maybe write one sentence on it, and then make sure my point comes across. That has to do with how short letters are, and just being kind of communicative in that way is important. Being straightforward is important. But connecting it is really important in terms of actually being able to be flagged by the editorial board staff. Yeah.
So there was a lot that was recently published in my paper, got 60, 70 comments, and it said hope is an authority on climate change. Is this something I can write a letter in response to, or does it have to do with the story?
You can certainly write a response to letters. People respond to letters all the time. Yeah. In fact, when you see something that is really debatable, that is not true, in some ways, that is the perfect opening to do that. So, great. So,
I know that sometimes these days most newspapers have an online system where you can leave a comment, and then I know some of them they go through the comments and sometimes print up some of them. But I guess I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, or like experience of how that works.
yeah, I have not used the comment section a lot. I find comment sections a little scary. Oftentimes people say really candid and mean things that aren't filtered, and it can be really uncomfortable. So I always just submit letters to the editor. It's also a formalized way to make sure that it makes it to newspapers. Yeah.
So yesterday, someone, I forget who we were talking to, but said only 1 in 10 letters to the editor get published. So I guess I'm just really nervous about how I'm going to get 5 letters to the editor, and if only 1 in 10 are going, like, I'll have to be writing a letter to the editor every day. How, like, I'm legitimately.
Yeah, so that's a really great point and a really great fear that what we publish or what we try to publish is not going to be accepted, which through our system, we found that when we are at the heart of our Ron Diploma City Letters to the Editor campaign, 1 in 9 were published. That was through our system. Those were people that were submitting it automatically, often submitting the same language. The reason why we have these tips, the reason why we ask you to use your own voice, the reason why we give these kind of little secrets to you on how you can get letters published is because it'll make the likelihood that you'll get published higher.
Okay.
That being said, the other way to really succeed at getting letters published is to follow through with the newspaper. Say, hey, I hadn't heard back about this. I just wanted to follow up to see if it's possible it could get published, and to start building a relationship with their editors. So we're gonna keep moving on, and if you guys have questions about this, we'll bring it to after. Yeah, great.
Write from your own voice. Your letter is more likely to get published if it comes from your voice. Don't be afraid to tell your story and to appeal to the audience from the heart as well as the head.
Great. We often submit letters to the editor, just publish this, we need you to publish this right now. That's when we get the 1 in 9. So it really is important to add your own conversation. This is 150 words, it's not too long. It doesn't take too much to write, and really just even putting in 1 or 2 lines that are really personal and catchy, that is gonna make it much more likely that you could get published. Great.
Mention your members of Congress by name. Members of Congress closely track their names in local and national media. If you include their name, it's likely the letter will reach your member's desk.
Again, I'm really glad that we've talked about that at the beginning, the middle, and hopefully we'll talk about it at the end, because that is probably the most important thing you can do. Sometimes, yes, it will be taken out, but if you don't do that, it just kind of makes the advocacy element of your letter moot. So make sure to do that.
Submit it to the newspaper. Submit the letter directly to the newspaper. Most newspapers have an online submissions page. And follow up by phone or email if you don't get a response. Put a letter in the body of the email to make it easy for the editorial staff to read. As you submit your letter, don't miss an opportunity to build a relationship with the staff.
Great. So yes, it seems really obvious. This kind of gets back to the way that FC Now often does action alerts, which is submit this, just use our system. You all, as people who are kind of doing the extra advocacy, not just clicktivism, it would be wonderful if you get in the habit of submitting these directly to the newspaper. It takes just 1 more minute, but they can often track when things come from automated systems like ours. For you to be able to put it in the newspaper or in the body of the email means that the staff at the editorial board has 1 less job to click to that. And so maybe you'll say something in the first line that's really catchy and they'll see that and they'll want to publish it. So just these little things that you wouldn't think make much of a difference, but they really can. And then the last one.
Report back.
Once your letter to the editor is published, let us know so we can track the impact. Also, make sure to call or email your members of Congress to let them know. This is a perfect opportunity to continue the conversation with your members of office.
Wonderful. So report back is the second most important thing you could do besides putting your members of Congress name in there. Report back is not just letting SCNL know that you've done it, not just, you know, publishing your 5 letters that you promised that you would do. It's reporting back is about actually calling up the office that you're trying to advocate, and letting them know that you've just published this letter and that you'd be really happy to talk about it. Calling up the staffer that you guys are going to be building relationships with. So every time you publish a letter, you should get in the habit of both emailing it to them first and then calling the next day. And just really making this a conversation. You're starting a conversation, as so many of you said. So really make this a conversation and take advantage of these moments. Cool. Yeah.
I just have a question regarding the whole. I was looking at the submission guidelines right now in my paper, and it said must be fact checked, otherwise we don't print it. Do we have, like, I don't think we have to cite the body of it. Like, what do you think we should do for that?
What they're saying there is don't say egregious things that aren't true.
Okay. Should you send the editor look at your sources separately, or?
I've never done that before, and I've never seen that that's necessary.
Okay.
I think as many people here are college students or college educated, and so our inclination is to want to fact check everything and give the exact facts that we are working from. If it's really important to the piece, sometimes you can link to it just in the letter, and that can be helpful, but I wouldn't go out of your way. I wouldn't spend all of your time supporting arguments that you already know are correct.
So you can put links in your argument.
Yeah, you can't put links into the letter in the same way you would put it in a Word document or an email. Yeah. And sometimes they do link to that on the newspaper, actually.
What would you say about including, like, where we're coming from in terms of, like, if I'm gonna write a letter as soon as I get back, like,
Well, you're gonna write a letter today.
yeah, or yeah, submit it. To say, like, I just got back from Washington where I talked to, you know, the office of Doug Malfa about this issue.
Great, yeah. So that is wonderful. That is an example of one way that you can tie in your own story and your own experience to build your expertise on that issue. So I would say that certainly all of us have an opportunity to write a letter that says, I just talked to this person, this member of Congress about this issue. I'm really excited to bring this back into my community. This could be an opportunity to recruit people who are interested. If you're interested in joining me, respond to this letter. I don't know, something like that, but great. So we're gonna, I just wanna make sure that we all have time to kind of write. I think these questions are really important. The thing that I'll have us do right now, first we're gonna write just kind of the 2 or 3 main points that we want in our letter. I gave you all a draft letter. Again, use your own voice. You all know so much more about this issue than I do. That's a fact. So I'd really like if you guys kind of use some of the most compelling arguments that you could think of, but feel free to draw from this format as well. We're gonna spend about the next maybe 10 minutes just writing these letters ourselves. Putting in some of the things that we've learned from this worksheet or the things that we know, and then I can come around and answer questions, and then we're actually going to share a few and see how the process went. Once you have written the body of your piece, it'd be great if folks could then start looking up the thing that you're going to connect it to, or the guidelines for the newspaper, but only after you really have the substance, because I want to make sure that's what we have time to workshop. Cool? Really burning questions that I think are important for us all to hear. I'll kind of interrupt and just make sure you're here. Great.